Hello my loves, it's time to talk about all of my most anticipated books for 2025. I have, I think, over 60 things to talk to you about, so this is gonna be a long one. Strap in, grab a cup of tea, have a sweet treat, and let's yap about some books. There are a couple of things I want to mention really quickly that have already come out in the first couple weeks of January, which are Adrift and Currents, Clean and Clear, which is the next book in the Wayward Children series by Shawnee McGuire. I actually did get an arc of it, but I haven't read it yet, so stay tuned for a reading vlog coming soon. The opening line and description of this one sounds so good. Nadia had three mothers, the one who bore her, the country that poisoned her, and the one who adopted her. And we get giant turtles, so what's not to love? Next up is Witchcraft for Wayward Girls by Grady Hendrix. I'm a Grady Hendrix stan, so I'm very excited for his next book, and it's gonna be witchy. This also has some conversations in it about motherhood, I believe, and it's classed as folk horror, which is just checking all of my boxes. And I'd seen this cover before, which is very lava lamp, but I also just found this cover, which is a very different vibe, so I am now even more intrigued to see kind of what the actual vibe of this book is going to be, because this is leaning a lot more horror to me than this is. Like, I know Grady Hendrix is gonna make it gross. This is giving haunted house and this is giving campy to me, so I'm curious to see where that line is gonna fall. I'm sure it'll be both. I feel like Grady Hendrix's last couple of releases I've enjoyed because they're Grady Hendrix, but I don't think since the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires have I found a description, a premise that just sounds this good to me, so I'm really excited for this one. Moving on to something a little bit cozier, this one also just came out on January 14th, is Water Moon by Samantha Soto Yambao. And in this one, a woman inherits a pawn shop where you can sell your regrets. This is giving strong Studio Ghibli vibes. One of our main characters seems to be a physicist, and I tend to love stories where we have the cozy magic of it all kind of bumping up against but still living in harmony with the science of it all. And I think it's gonna have a little bit of a romance in it. This just feels so far up my alley, and I'm convinced I'm going to love it. Switching to a very different tone with Blob, a love story by Maggie Sue. This is expected to be released on January 28th, and it is the story of a woman who turns a sentient blob into her boyfriend. And I frankly don't need to know any more than that, and I don't think you do either. So we're gonna see what happens with this one. On February 11th, we are going to get You Are Fatally Invited by Andy Pliego. And the reason why this is on my radar is because I love books about authors, specifically authors' retreats. I loved The Writing Retreat, and I'm hoping that this is going to have similar vibes to that. I like how in this one, all of the authors are thriller authors, so I'm wondering how much of this kind of breaking the fourth wall, a little bit tongue-in-cheek with the thriller tropes like we get in series like Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone. I really love that aspect of that, so I'm hoping that we'll get some of that in this one, because all of the authors at this retreat are thriller authors and know all of these tropes, and then of course I'm sure they're going to get picked off one by one. That is the only February release that I have on my list, which is quite rude of me because February is my birth month and there's nothing else I'm excited about coming out in that month. So if you know of any February releases, I need to know them in the comments. I do know a million books that are being released on March 4th, however, starting with The Unworthy by Augustina Bazterrica, translated by Sarah Moses. This is the author of Tender is the Flesh, which I haven't read but have heard incredible things about. This might be further up my alley than Tender is the Flesh is. This is about a convent with this like very violent religious order, and they call themselves the Unworthy, and I'm just so interested right now in exploring religion and religious guilt and religious violence and kind of all of the things that I think I'm gonna get out of this. It seems also that we're gonna get some climate crisis elements to this. It seems to be that is why this religious cult has kind of sprung up. I think this is gonna be my first novel from this author, and I will let you know how it goes. Also on March 4th is The River Has Roots. This is from Amal Al-Motar, who is one of the authors who wrote This Is How You Lose the Time War, which is an incredible book that I love so deeply and still think about to this day. Here's the quote that is listed in the description. "Oh, what is stranger than a death? Two sisters singing with one breath." It's a novella, it's queer, it's also got a romance. There's apparently a suitor that one of our sisters is supposed to marry, potentially, and instead she's going to the land of fairy. So we have fairies in this. I don't know any more than that, but I don't need to know any more than that. Next up, we need to talk about See You at the Altar by Rebecca Thorne. This is the third book in a cozy fantasy series that I personally adore, and this is going to be the first one that is directly traditional traditionally published. The first two were self-published initially before they were picked up by Tor, and it's got fun crimson sprayed edges. I'm really curious to see what this book is going to be like because I haven't read the traditionally published versions of the first two books, and I know that there was some extensive editing that went into them before they were traditionally published. The first book I love, no notes. The second one I think dragged a little bit, and I'm just really curious to see what magic comes out of Rebecca Thorne's head and her writing. Having gone through a traditional publishing editing process, I cannot wait to see how this series is going to continue. The arc of the series has a similar trajectory to Legends and Lattes, but it is quite a bit less cozy in the way that there is more action going on. There's pirates and dragons and griffins, and we are doing fighting and lives are at stake, but it still has this really cozy relationship at the center of it all. And I really love how this relationship is established before the series starts, so you really get to see two people in love, but still constantly working on things as you do in a relationship. I just think it's really realistic in a very comforting way. And like I said, I do have an arc of this one, so hopefully I will get you a review before it comes out in March. Next up is Well Dark Shore by Charlotte McConaughey, also coming out on March 4th. This is from the same author as Once There Were Wolves and Migrations. Once There Were Wolves, I loved. Migrations, I ended up DNFing for content, but really desperately want to return to because it was a beautiful book. I just wasn't in the right headspace for it. All of this author's books have something to say about climate change, and they also are deeply connected to an animal. And in this one, it seems we're focused on a seed bank and seals. Her books are always so literary and profound, so we'll see what she's cooking up in this next one. Okay, the last book that I have that's releasing on March 4th is A Song for You and I by Kay O'Neill. This is the author of The Tea Dragon Society. So I'm really excited to read another middle grade graphic novel from this author. And this one is a romance, which is exciting because we haven't really had a romance from this author before, at least not that I have read. And one of our main characters is training to be a ranger, and there's flying horses involved, so what could be better than that? This next one is very exciting because I actually have the book with me because I was sent an arc from the publisher, which is very exciting, so thank you so much to Del Rey and Penguin Random House for sending this to me. This is Homegrown Magic. I'm dying to find out what is between these pages. I mean, just look at this map. It's a cozy fantasy, it's a romance, it's queer. It's written by two authors, Jamie Pacton and Rebecca Podos, and apparently the premise for this book was inspired by a D&D campaign, and the press kit that they sent me was so adorable. One of our main characters comes from an obscenely wealthy banking family who just wants a grand adventure, and the other main character is a talented plant witch and tea lover. I'm anticipating this to be full of cozy magic, and there's even a cat on the cover, so I don't make the rules. It's gonna be 5 stars. I've talked about this one before. It comes out on March 18th. It is The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. We finally have a date for it. We've got Indian vampires seeking justice for a massacre that was committed in 1870. I love Stephen Graham Jones. I'm gonna read everything that he picks up. Very excited that there are vampires in this. One of the only nonfictions I have on this list is Everything is Tuberculosis by John Green. I love John Green's nonfiction. The Anthropocene Reviewed was one of my favorite books of the year in the year that I read it. And I know that John Green has been yelling about tuberculosis on the internet for decades now, so I can't wait to see all of the information that he has compiled into this book. And it's one of my goals to read more nonfiction this year, and this is just perfect. It comes out on March 18th. Celia Lasky has a new book that is coming out on March 25th. It's called Cover Story, and it is a love story, and it is queer. We have a publicist, and part of her job is basically keeping gay celebrities in the closet, except now she's fallen in love with one of them. The book I read by Celia Lasky is a very different tone from this. I read So Happy For You, which is like this toxic friendship, kind of a thriller, kind of not very much concerned with weddings and wedding culture, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars, but a lot of people hated it. I have not seen Celia Lasky write a romance before, and I'm very interested to see what she's gonna do with this type of story. On April 1st, we have The Last Session by Julia Bartz. I just want to take a moment for the cover design of both of Julia Bartz's novels. Impeccable. I loved the writing retreat by this author. To come out that strong in a debut makes me very excited to see what she's gonna do in this one, and I'm really just so curious, especially after seeing the cover of this peel back as a psychiatric evaluation form, and it looks like this is gonna be weird. Like, the writing retreat got weird in a sexual way, and I think this one is gonna push that envelope even further. We have a psychiatric unit, we have a social worker. We have this weird monthly retreat that I think is gonna get sexual in an uncomfortable way, and I'm gonna see what happens. Abby Jimenez is also coming out with a new book this year. 2024 was the year of Abby Jimenez for me. Just for the Summer is my favorite romance book of all time, and I don't think anything is going to top it, including this book, but that experience turned Abby Jimenez into an auto-read author for me, so I will be reading Say You'll Remember Me, which is the story of these two individuals. They went on a date, but they're not able to be together after that date. The date went so well, but they're not able to be together, and so now they've kind of like broken apart. Obviously, they're gonna get back together and fall in love. One of our main characters is a veterinarian, and there are cuddly kittens involved, and there's a dog on the cover, so I'm sure I'm going to love this. The sequel to The Tainted Cup is coming out on April 1st. I will be reading this on release day. I love The Tainted Cup so much. It was in my top 10 of the year last year. I'm so excited to dive into more of Robert Jackson Bennett's work this year. He did an incredible job with this fantasy murder mystery, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't want to read the description of this. I just want to find out as I go into it. We're getting our two main characters back, Anna and Cole, and that is all I really need to know. Okay, this I'm positive is gonna make me cry. It might look tender and sweet on the outside and like it's going to be a heartwarming story about a kitty cat, and it is, but apparently the kitty gets ill, and it's a stray kitty, and it like touches all of these people's lives, and then the kitty gets sick, and then they're all gonna have to like take care of it. I don't know if the kitty's gonna survive, and I'm crying about this fake cat that I don't even know because I haven't even read the book, but this book is gonna make me cry, and I have no one to blame but me for the tears that I will shed over this stray kitty. And in the biggest tone shift, I will also be anticipating Sky Daddy by Kate Folk. It's a woman who's sexually attracted to planes. She wants to marry a plane by dying in a plane crash so she can be tied to it for eternity. I read Out There by this author and really loved the collection of short stories, so I'm curious to see if I'm gonna like a fuller length novel that seems to be much more unhinged than that short story collection, and the short story collection was still unhinged. Sarah Maria Griffin is publishing Eat the Ones You Love on April 22nd, which is about an orchid who wants to eat, consume, and love a woman. Emily Henry also has a love story coming out this year on April 22nd. This one is supposed to be different from her other books. Looks like we have an older woman who has invited both of our main characters to stay with her for a 1-month trial period, and then she's gonna pick who writes her biography based on that. I'll read anything that Emily Henry writes. The premise of this one doesn't sound super interesting to me, but I always have a good time with her books, so we'll see what happens. Sayaka Murata has a new book, and after Earthlings scarred me, I don't know if I'm gonna love this one, but we are going to give it a try. This one is set in a world where people don't have sex, so all babies are born via artificial insemination. But our main character's parents committed the ultimate taboo, and they fell in love and had sex and had a baby. I can guarantee it will at least be extremely interesting. A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, which we have talked about in one of these videos before, but it has a new release date. It's going to be published on July 15th now. This is the same author as The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches, which I did enjoy. This one is once again following a witch. There is a talking fox, which I could not be more excited for. Chuck Wendig has a book coming out. I've not read anything from this author before. I have heard that he writes extremely scary things. And the premise of this one is that we have a group of friends who finds a staircase in the woods. One friend walks up, the staircase disappears, they never come back down. And then 20 years later, the staircase pops up again. I love an unexplained cosmic horror, so we're gonna give this one a go. Mira Grant, which is the pen name for Shauna Maguire, has another book out called Overgrowth, and the cover of this one looks stunning. The first line of the description says, "This is just a story, it can't hurt you anymore," which is horrifying. Looks like our main character has been telling everyone who would listen that she's an alien disguised as a human being since she was 3. And now the invasion is coming, the aliens are back. This looks incredible. Ocean Vuong has a new book coming out, and it is called The Emperor of Gladness. It's coming out on May 13th. I loved On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, and I'm excited to see what Ocean Vuong does next. Catherine Mack has a new book out. This is the second book in the Vacation Mystery series, which kicked off with Every Time I Go on Vacation, Someone Dies, which I greatly enjoyed. There is another one coming out called No One Was Supposed to Die at This Wedding. I thought that the first book was incredibly fun, so can't wait to see how the next one's gonna go. Also on May 13th, 13th is Awake in the Floating City. This is by Susanna Kwan, and it is a debut novel that looks very cozy and literary at the same time. We have an artist and a 130-year-old woman whom she is caring for in a floating city where most of the inhabitants have left due to climate change. I think the cover of this one is stunning. Ling Wang has a new book coming out called Immaculate Conception. This is the author of Natural Beauty, which I loved. Natural Beauty was very concerned about beauty and beauty standards. This one seems to be very concerned about empathy. And we have an unconventional technology that is designed to heighten empathy. It's also set in the fiercely competitive art world, so we shall see how those two things are going to interact. Vaishnavi Patel is coming out with another book as well. This is set to release on June 3rd, and I actually did just get approved for the arc of this, which I'm very excited about. This is the author of Kaikei and Goddess of the River. I loved Kaikei. Goddess of the River was also incredible, but I think Kaikei is definitely my favorite of the two. This one is a little bit of a departure from her first two books. They were both retellings, and this one is an alternate history. So we are set in Kingston, which was built on the ashes of Bombay. So this is if the British were still colonizing India. And we get to see the resistance movement that would have unfolded there had the British remained in power for longer. I just started reading this one the other night, and it's really good. Hiro Arakawa has a new book that's being translated into English and set to release on June 5th. She is the author of The Traveling Cat Chronicles, which made me absolutely sob over this cat. And this one is set on a train. We have a young man who meets a young woman who always seems to be borrowing the library book that he wants just before he can take it out. A woman in a bridal dress who is very sad. A student who's leaving home for the first time. A girl who's planning to leave her abusive boyfriend. And an old lady discussing adopting a dog with her granddaughter. I think it'll be cozy. I think it'll be sweet. I think it'll have things to say about being a human. Riley Sager also has a new book coming out. It's called With a Vengeance. It's going to be published on the 12th of June. The cover for this one is gorgeous. And we have 6 people associated with this woman's father's death who are on this train from New York to Chicago. A murder mystery thriller is going to ensue. This next one is maybe a little bit different from things that I've read in the past. It's called The Bachelor Party. It's by Camilla Sten. The reason why this got me is because it's described as Scream meets The Guest List, which are 2 of my favorite things. So I'm gonna at least give it a go. I'm not sure if it's going to be exactly what I want, especially because it's classed as a thriller, mystery, and a romance. So we'll see how that goes. We're gonna be at a bachelorette party and people are gonna die. That's all I know. V. Schwab has a new book coming out called Bury Your Bones in the Midnight Soil on June 10th. It's queer, it's fantasy, it's got vampires. That's all I know about it. We're gonna find out together how it is. Silvia Moreno Garcia has a new book out called The Bewitching. I did not love her last release, which was Silver Nitrate, but I did really enjoy Mexican Gothic, so I'm curious to see how this one is gonna go. It is a witchy book, which is very exciting. And our main character is a graduate student of horror literature, which for that part alone, I can't wait to see what is going to unfold in this book. Girl in the Creek is something that's on my radar. It's by Wendy and Wagner, and it will be released on July 15th. It's the story of a woman who goes into this national forest and finds a woman in a creek. The girl keeps vanishing from the creek and also from the morgue. Maybe it's gonna be a little bit zombie. I love fungal horror. There are mushrooms on the cover of this, so I'm gonna give it a try. The Hounding is something that looks very interesting. It's definitely more literary than a lot of things that I read, but it sounds weird enough that I'm gonna love it. It's expected to be published on August 5th. It's by Zenobi Purvis. Hopefully I'm saying that correctly. And it's about 5 sisters in a small village in 18th century England whose neighbors are convinced they're turning into dogs. I don't need to know any more than that. Samantha Downing has a new book out called Too Old for This. I skipped her last release because of content, but we've got an old serial killer, a retired serial killer, who has like a journalist knock on her door, and I guess she has to decide if she's gonna kill this journalist who's looking into her crimes of the past. A Game in Yellow by Haley Piper is something that I'm also intrigued by. This seems to be inspired by The Yellow King, which is a series of short stories that I am very interested in reading. I think I read it back in school, but I'd love to read it again. So we have a couple who has access to this play, The King in Yellow, and the idea behind The King in Yellow is if you read it, you'll fall into madness. And the idea here is if you read just a little, you won't go mad. You'll get this like survivor's euphoria, which is interesting. I think it's gonna get weird in a sexual way. T. Kingfisher has another book coming out called Hemlock and Silver, and it's coming out August 19th. And it's supposed to be a reimagining of Snow White. It has a taciturn bodyguard, a narcissistic cat, and a late Renaissance understanding of the scientific method. T. Kingfisher is my favorite author. I can't wait for this one. Isabel Cañas, another author that I adore, is coming out with a new book called The Possession of Alba Diaz, and the cover of this, stunning. We've got a demonic presence, we've got a plague, it's gonna be gothic. I am really interested to see what role romance is going to play in this because the Hacienda had a little bit, Vampires of El Norte had much more, so I'm curious to see if this one's going to have some romance in it, and if so, how much. R.F. Kuang is also coming out with a book called Catabasis. This is going to be a descent into hell. I'll read anything that R.F. Kuang writes. It's going to be academic, it's going to be set in hell. I'm sure I'll give it 5 stars. Next up is The Second Death of Locke by V.L. Bovalino. The description of this says it's perfect for fans of Gideon the Ninth and The Sixth Death of the Saint. I loved both of those, gave those both 5 stars, I believe. We shall see what's going on in here. It's supposed to be a devastatingly romantic epic fantasy about the undying bond between a knight and their mage. Next up, I want to let you know that there is a second book coming out in the Amina Al-Sarafi series. So Shannon Chakraborty is writing another one, doesn't have a title yet, but it should be out on September 25th. T. Kingfisher, my favorite author, is coming out with the 3rd book in the Sworn Soldier series, and I believe this is the book that she wrote the entire novella series for. It started with What Moves the Dead, which is a retelling of The Fall of the House of Usher. Then we had What Feasts at Night. T. Kingfisher had initially said she had an idea for this novella series, but the idea that she had was for like either the 3rd or the 4th book in the series, and so she's had to create this whole series in order to write, I think, this story. Our main character, Alex Easton, is going to America, and they're visiting a haunted, abandoned coal mine in West Virginia, and we shall see what our sworn soldier gets up to there. Evo is also coming out with the next book in the Singing Hills cycle. This is number 6. It's called A Mouthful of Dust. I want to go into this blind. I don't want to read the description. I don't want to know what's going on. This is one of my favorite novella series, and I love all of them deeply. They all have something to say about storytelling, so I'm curious to see what story Nevo is going to write in this one. Martha Wells is also coming out with a new book called Queen Demon. This is the sequel to Witch King, which I did enjoy, and I love the Murderbot series by this author as well, so we'll see what our characters get up to in this second book. I just saw this yesterday. Marie Lu has a book called Red City. The only information I have about it is the cover and the fact that it is alchemy and crime syndicates. Sounds right up my alley. Travis Baldry's sequel to Legends and Lattes, Brigands and Red Knives, is coming out on the 11th of November. There's no cover yet, but this is the sequel. I think the first time Travis Baldry sat down to write the sequel, he ended up writing a prequel instead. I'm excited that he's finally written the second one, and we'll see what's going on with it. Some other things that I don't have dates for yet. There's a new Catherine Steadman that's supposed to be coming out in the summer of 2025. I love this author's books. I really enjoyed Look in the Mirror. I think Something in the Water is still my favorite by this author, but I've enjoyed every book that I've read by her. She's got a new book coming out in the summer of this year. Tim Probert is working on book 4 in the Lightfall series. I adore this series. It's my favorite graphic novel series ever. I've read the first 2 books, and I can't wait to see the story continue in book 4. Sarah Grant is also coming out with a new book. This is expected on the 11th of February 2025. This is a short story collection. I didn't include this in like the main section when I was going through February books because I don't know if I'm going to read it because it seems to be tying into a series that she wrote, the Claire DeWitt series, which I haven't read. So I think I'm just gonna wait for people to write reviews on this and see if I need to read that series before I dive into this. But just so you know, there is a short story collection coming out by Sarah Grant. If you read that series before, I'm sure you will love it. Stephen Graham Jones also has something coming out likely fall of 2026. It's called Last Stand at Saber Ridge, and we have an unlikely pair of natives using time travel to interrogate the generals of the so-called Indian Wars. A new Benjamin Stevenson is coming because he was writing it in a window display of a bookshop as like a PR stunt, which is strange and hilarious, much like this author. But there is a 4th book coming in this series, which is, I would say, my favorite murder mystery series ever. I just finished reading the Christmas special novella and it was Perfect, no notes. So really excited that there's another one coming out. Incredible news, Mona Wad is releasing a prequel slash sequel to Bunny called We Love You Bunny. It's supposed to be coming out in September of 2025. I don't know how I feel about it. I'm very excited to have more Bunny, but I also feel like I just want Bunny to exist as it exists, and I don't know if I want any more content about it. I'm gonna read it, but I'm worried about it. The camera overheated, but that's okay because we only have one book left to talk about. It is 13 Months Haunted by Jimmy Giuliano. This is the author of this book, which I cannot think of what it's called to save my life. Dead 11. I did not read Dead 11, but I do have it on my TBR shelf at home. This one seems like it's gonna be witchy and that I'm gonna hate using technology after reading it. So can't wait for that. Okay, that is everything that I'm excited about reading in 2025. Please let me know in the comments what you are greatly anticipating this year. I feel like there are just so many incredible releases coming out. I don't know if it's just because I have read so many books now that I have so many authors that I'm watching, or if this is just gonna be a really fantastic year in publishing, but I cannot wait to read all of these fantastic releases and find out if they live up to the hype or not. Okay, that's it from me. If you're new here and you want to stick around and see me read all of these books, I would love for you to subscribe. Otherwise, I will see all of you lovely people next week. Bye.